My name is Charlotte Hayes, 41 years old, a high school teacher living in a quiet town nestled in the mountains of North Carolina. I used to believe I had a strong marriage, 15 years without arguments, without distance. Until the day my husband suddenly passed away, and I stepped into a storage shed he'd never let me near. Inside weren't tools or car parts like he always said. It was a room full of hidden photographs, maps, bank documents, and in every one of those pictures, he was smiling with another woman, alongside a teenage boy I had never known existed. If it were you, if you discovered the person you loved had a second family, what would you do? Forgive or dig deeper until the very end? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and follow the channel to hear the untold story of a secret room, an unfinished will, and a child no one dared to acknowledge. I still remember the scent of white lilies that day, the kind Jonathan always bought every Sunday morning, placing them in the small glass vase by the kitchen window. After the funeral, I noticed the vase was empty, and for the first time in 15 years, I realized I had no idea who would be the one to do that now. Jonathan was the kind of man who made others feel safe simply by being present. Always on time, always polite, never raised his voice, never made me worry about things like bills, contracts, or bank accounts. "I've got it," he'd say with a reassuring smile. I trusted him because I loved him, and because our life, at least on the surface, seemed so complete that I never thought to question it. We didn't have children. After 3 years of failed fertility treatments, I was the one who chose to stop. I didn't want to keep dragging myself through hope and heartbreak. One night, I held Jonathan close and whispered, "I'm still happy, as long as I have you." He only nodded and pulled me closer, like that gesture could hold everything we weren't saying. Looking back, I still don't know if it was love or avoidance. Rachel arrived a few days after the funeral. She hugged me for a long time, her familiar scent of Chanel No. 5 almost suffocating. I used to adore Rachel. I defended her every time our parents scolded her for dropping out of school or bouncing between jobs. But over time we drifted, not because of a big falling out, but because of long silences no one was brave enough to break. "You're so strong," Rachel whispered as she pulled away, her hands still holding mine. I can't even imagine if it had been me. At that moment, I still believed she was here to grieve, not to bring something else. That night, after most of the guests had left, Rachel stepped into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of red wine like she was at home. She sat across from me at the dining table, slowly swirling the glass in her hand. "Hey," she said softly. "I know this isn't the best time, but before he passed, Jonathan said he'd help me out financially." I looked up from my cold cup of tea. "Help you with what?" "30,000. He said he'd invest in my spa project in Durham, remember? I told him about the idea." I frowned. "He never mentioned anything like that to me." Rachel let out a small laugh, like I was being silly. "Oh, you know Jonathan, always so organized. Maybe he hadn't gotten around to telling you yet, or figured you'd find out eventually." A strange feeling crept into my chest, like noticing something out of place in a familiar room. No one says it aloud, but you know something's wrong. "Your accounts haven't been unfrozen yet, right?" Rachel went on, still light, almost casual. "If you want, I can send you my info so it's easier to transfer later once things settle." I set my tea down and straightened up. "Are you asking me for money from my husband's funeral?" Rachel gave a small smile, sipped her wine. "Not asking, just reminding. I think I have a right. And I know Jonathan wanted to help." There was something in her eyes that chilled me, confident, almost possessive, like she knew him in a way I never did. I stood up and walked to the cabinet to grab a napkin, anything to avoid facing her. I couldn't believe it. But then, when I opened the drawer, my eyes landed on a small photo frame tucked in the corner. An old picture. Jonathan standing next to Rachel, his hand gently on her shoulder, at a Christmas party years ago. I hadn't thought anything of it at the time. Now, the warmth in his eyes made my skin crawl. I picked up the photo and turned it toward Rachel. "Is there something you need to tell me?" She raised an eyebrow. About what? About him. About the two of you. Rachel set her wine down and slowly shook her head. What are you implying? I'm your sister. I stared at her. Yes. And I'm starting to wonder if I ever really knew you. Rachel sighed, stood up. Her gaze hardened. You're grieving. I get it. But don't let pain cloud your memory. Jonathan cared about you. He told me you needed protection. He was good to everyone. She emphasized the word everyone like a pointed reminder. My hands began to tremble. When Rachel left, I closed the door softly, but my mind kept replaying the same question. Why did she know so much about Jonathan that I never did? I returned to the table, saw the half glass of wine, the napkin Rachel left behind, and the photo that no longer sat inside its frame. I began to understand. This wouldn't end with a funeral. That rainy afternoon, I drove to the old industrial district on the south side of Charlotte, the place Jonathan once described as just a space for tools and junk. I'd never been there. He'd always say, "You hate the smell of grease, nothing worth seeing," and I believed him. Believed enough not to act. The warehouse was tucked between crumbling buildings with rusted tin roofs and ivy-covered walls. If it weren't for the strange key I found in his drawer, marked with an unfamiliar symbol, I would never have found it. I stepped out of the car, gripping the cold metal key like a relic. The steel door towered over me. The lock gave a heavy click when I turned the key. The door groaned as it opened, revealing a space thick with dust and time. Inside, it was pitch dark. I fumbled for the light switch. When the overhead fluorescent lights finally flickered on, I froze. It wasn't a tool shed, it wasn't a warehouse. It was a gallery, a hidden world I never knew Jonathan lived in. The left wall was covered in photographs, each one neatly pinned, numbered, annotated, in handwriting I knew too well. The right wall held a world map with red lines connecting Charlotte to Lisbon, from Toronto to Tokyo. On the desk were neatly stacked financial documents, thick envelopes, and sticky notes scrawled with Jonathan's handwriting. I stepped closer to the first wall of photos. Jonathan was in them, but not the version I knew. No white shirt, no polished suit, no perfectly knotted tie. He wore gray t-shirts, his hair was messy, and he smiled freely. A smile I hadn't seen in years. Beside him, in almost every picture, was a woman at least 10 years younger than me. Brown hair, intelligent eyes, high cheekbones, and a gentle smile. And beside them, a teenage boy, probably 18 or 19. His eyes looked exactly like Jonathan's. My hand shook as I flipped each photo. Behind them were blue-inked notes. Rocky Mountains, Summer 21. Paris, Fall 22. Jay loved the pastries. June 14th, 2024. Family dinner. Then I saw a framed photo in the corner, silver-edged, taken at an Italian restaurant. Jonathan pouring wine, the woman beaming, the boy raising a glass of orange juice like at a small birthday celebration. I choked up reading the note on the back. To E&J. Always family. June, 2024. I remembered that day vividly. Jonathan had called, saying he was at an investment seminar in Texas and would be home late. I stayed in, made his favorite barbecue ribs, even baked almond cake for dessert. So while I was lighting candles at our table, he was dining with them. His real family. I had to brace myself against the table to stay upright. My vision blurred, ears ringing like someone was screaming inside my head. I tried to breathe, but my throat locked tight. I opened a metal drawer under the desk almost involuntarily, like hoping to find a reason. Inside was a medical file. Thin sheets, but the print was clear. I scanned the title. Cardiac Diagnostic Report. Dr. Michael Renner. Charleston Heart Institute. Below that, his full name. Jonathan R. Hayes. Diagnosis, Stage 3 heart failure. Prognosis, high risk of sudden cardiac arrest. Activated date 7 weeks before he died. I collapsed into the old swivel chair. My mind was blank. He knew. He knew he was dying. He knew it clearly. But instead of telling me, instead of preparing me, instead of spending his final days with the wife who had stood by him for 15 years, he chose to hide it. And spent his last moments with another woman, another child, another world. I buried my face in my hands as tears spilled out sharp and heavy, not because I was betrayed, but because I no longer knew who I was in his life. A wife? A partner? A piece in some performance? Rain pounded against the metal roof. The room seemed to go still. It was just me and the fragments of a life I had never been invited into. Then, suddenly, my eyes landed on a small corner where a map was pinned, with red lines stretching out like spiderwebs. A name appeared on one of the notes. Redstone Equity, LLC. Next to it was a simple logo and a handwritten caption. Transfer routes, clean slate for E and J. I read it again, softly. Clean slate. A new beginning. But whose beginning? And where was I in that design? I got to my feet and started photographing every detail I could. Pictures, records, documents, every scribbled note. I didn't trust anyone anymore. I wasn't sure what was real. Outside, night had fallen completely. But I was still standing there, in the room my husband had once forbidden me to enter. And now every photo, every piece of paper in that room, didn't just reveal the truth about one man. It opened the door to something I had never dared imagine. I wasn't the only one Jonathan left behind. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the images from that room returned. Jonathan's smile next to that unknown woman. The tenderness in his gaze toward the young man who looked so much like him. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like a stranger in my own life. I turned on the kitchen light and poured myself a glass of water, but my hands shook so much I had to sit down to keep it from spilling. The house suddenly felt unfamiliar, like I was living in someone else's space. Then came a knock at the door. At first I thought I imagined it, but the knock came again, gentle but firm. I glanced at the clock. Nearly midnight. I hesitated for a few seconds, then walked to the front door, gripping my phone tightly. When I opened it, the young man from the photographs was standing there. Tall, slim, eyes steady but not confrontational. His curly hair was damp with rain. No hat, no umbrella. "Are you Charlotte Hayes?" he asked, voice low but soft. I nodded, one hand still on the door, the other clutching my phone. "I'm Jackson Harper." He took a deep breath as if bracing himself. Jonathan Hayes was my father. I don't know how long I stayed silent. The wind swept through the porch and I shivered. Finally I spoke, my voice raw from tension. "And how old are you?" 20, Jackson replied, eyes locked on mine. "I'm a third-year law student at UNC Chapel Hill." I looked into his eyes. And somehow, I believed him. Not because he said it clearly, but because of his eyes, the angle of his jaw, the way he waited for my reaction without pressure. Every detail felt like Jonathan. I stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in," I said, my voice hollow. We sat across from each other in the living room. The light was dim. The wall clock ticked steadily, as if counting down to something that could no longer be undone. "I know this is hard to believe," Jackson began, "but I didn't come here to ask for anything. I just wanted you to know. And there's something I think belongs to you." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a slightly crumpled envelope, placing it on the glass table in front of me. I looked at him, then picked it up. The envelope was thick, heavy, and carried that faint hospital scent, paper and antiseptic. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten will. Yellowed paper, unmistakable handwriting. Jonathan's. From the very first line. "If I don't get the chance to formalize this, trust the boy, he did nothing wrong. Charlotte, you are still the only one I trust with the key. Redstone Equity, the account at Firstbridge, savings book number 2874, and the sapphire necklace, all encrypted the way you like. If things fall apart, look inside. I trust you'll know what to do." I gripped the paper tightly, my chest pounding. Jonathan had known. He knew everything would come to light one day, and that I'd be the one left to face the wreckage. I looked up at Jackson. "Do you know anything about Redstone Equity?" He shook his head. Not much. My mom, Lise, never dealt with the money side. My dad kept everything separate. But I heard him mention clean money channels, and that if he didn't make it, everything would go to the one he trusted most. I think he meant you. I gave a dry laugh, uncertain if it was bitter or broken. Funny, I was the one sleeping next to him every night, and I knew nothing. Jackson studied me for a moment. I grew up waiting, he said. Waiting for him to show up on Saturdays. Waiting for texts. Waiting for the day he'd tell the world about me. But he never did. I swallowed hard. Are you angry? He was quiet, then said, Yes, but I understand. And now, I don't want to live in his shadow anymore. I pulled the sapphire necklace from my coat pocket. Jonathan had given it to me 2 days before he died. I thought it was a sweet farewell gift. I didn't know it was the key to an entire secret system. I'm not sure I'm ready for what's in that box, I whispered. You don't have to do it alone, Jackson said, his eyes unwavering. I'm here, and if you'll let me, I want to see it through with you. I felt a flicker of something. Not hope. Just the sense that I wasn't completely alone anymore. Jackson looked around the room, his eyes landing on the wedding photo hanging on the wall. You loved him that much? I didn't turn to look at the picture. I only whispered, I loved a man who, it turns out, may never have truly existed. 2 days later, I sat in the passenger seat of Jackson's old car, watching rows of thick oaks along the South Carolina highway blur past like thoughts I couldn't name. Around my neck, the sapphire pendant felt cold, as if it understood exactly where we were headed. Jonathan had once called it his satellite office, a small space in downtown Charleston used for discreet meetings away from public view. In 15 years of marriage, I had never been allowed to enter it. I had never questioned that. Jackson pulled into the basement of a tall glass building. The office was on the 10th floor, at the end of a hallway, completely separate from the rows of law firms and tech companies around it. Outside the door, a metal plaque simply read, R.E. Holdings. He swiped the card. The door opened with a soft beep. The lights came on automatically as we stepped inside. The room was so neatly arranged it felt soulless. A black wood desk with no decorations, no photo frames, no plants. Nothing to show that Jonathan had once spent hours, days, sitting here. I looked around, feeling like I had stepped onto a stage after the play had ended and the lead actor had vanished without delivering his final lines. You sure? Jackson asked, eyes serious. The necklace has a special rotating mechanism like a combination lock. Jonathan knew I liked vintage things, so I think it's a clue. I took the necklace off, found the small notch beneath the stone and turned it gently to the left. A faint click echoed. Behind the desk, the abstract painting on the wall shifted forward slightly. Jackson stepped over and pressed the corner of the frame. A concealed steel door appeared in the wall. Try it, he said. I took a deep breath and slid the thin metal piece hidden in the necklace, shaped like a chip, into the reader beside the door. A green light blinked. The door opened, revealing a wall safe. Inside were 3 items: a black unmarked hard drive, a small velvet box holding another necklace, this one engraved with the initials EH, and a stack of printed security camera photos tucked into a manila envelope. My hands trembled as I picked up each one. Jackson stood beside me silently. Was this your mother's? I asked, voice hoarse, nodding at the necklace. My mom liked amethyst, he said. But this is sapphire. I never saw her wear it. Maybe it was something Jonathan kept. I opened the envelope. My eyes landed on the first photo. Black and white, clear, time-stamped. 3 days after Jonathan died. A man in a baseball cap and heavy coat, head down, entered the office. This exact room. He rifled through drawers, accessed the computer, removed the hard drive. In the next 3 photos, it was clear he took something wrapped in a black cloth bag. I turned to Jackson. Do you notice anything strange? He examined the image. The door doesn't show signs of forced entry. Whoever this is had an access card. I looked closely at the corner of the photo near his ID badge. The name was blurred, but a faded logo of a private security firm was visible. I wrote down the company name and set the photo down, heart pounding. Someone had come in right after Jonathan died, someone who knew exactly what to look for. I picked up the hard drive, pressing it into my palm. The metal was ice cold. Jonathan wasn't the type to keep backups without a reason. If he stored this here, behind encryption and in a private safe, it meant it held something vital. "Do you have a decryption tool?" Jackson asked. "I know someone who can help," I said, "an old friend of Jonathan's. He used to work in digital forensics." We left the office just as evening settled in. In the elevator, Jackson turned to me. "Do you think Jonathan did all this because he wanted to protect you?" I didn't answer right away. I thought about the necklace, the photo of Elise and the boy in that hidden room, the missing documents, the layers of disguise the man I once loved had built. "Maybe partly," I said quietly, "but maybe it was for himself, out of guilt or fear." We got to the car. A soft drizzle had started. I looked down at the necklace in my hand, the one engraved with another woman's initials. For some reason, even in the cold, my hand felt warm, as if I were holding a memory that wasn't mine but was now my responsibility to unravel. That afternoon, I was sorting through the photos from the wall safe in Jonathan's old office when I heard the doorbell. Jackson was at the university library. I was alone in a house that now held too much silence. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I froze. Rachel was standing there. She wore a cream knit dress, hair pinned up neatly, light makeup, as if she had come to offer condolences one more time. But her eyes no longer held the dazed look from the funeral. They were sharper, focused, as if she had waited for the perfect moment to step back on stage. "Do you have a few minutes?" she asked, voice soft. I stepped aside and let her in. We sat down in the living room. Rachel glanced around, pausing at the coffee table where I had left a few files and a photo frame face down. She didn't rush. She rested her elbows on her knees, fingers absently rubbing the sleeve like someone preparing to say something important. "I know this isn't easy to say," she began, "but there's something you should know. I think it's better if I just say it outright." I stared at her without blinking. "I'm pregnant," Rachel said, her voice dropping, "and the baby is Jonathan's." The air turned thick, as if everything had stopped moving. A chill ran down my spine. "I know that's hard to believe," she continued, "but it's true. Jonathan and I, well, we reconnected about a year ago. It wasn't planned, it's just, he always cared about me. When I was unemployed, when my ex dumped me, he was there." I clenched my hands in my lap, nails digging into my thighs through the fabric. "And you thought that gave you permission to sleep with my husband?" I asked, voice like ice. Rachel sighed. "I'm not here to fight. I just wanted you to know. And because this involves the will, the assets—" "No," I cut in. "There's no mention of you in the will. Jonathan clearly stated provisions for his son, the one he never had the courage to tell me about for 15 years. Rachel tilted her head, a faint smile on her lips. "What about the baby I'm carrying, Charlotte? It's part of the Hayes bloodline, too. You can't ignore that." I remained still, unable to move or think, not because of her words, but because of her expression. There wasn't an ounce of remorse in her eyes for betraying her own sister. "What do you want?" I asked. Rachel blinked slowly. "I'm not looking to start a war, I just think if you could set aside a small portion, something from the Redstone Equity Fund, maybe, then everything could stay quiet. I don't want this to end up in court. You just walked into my home, admitted you slept with my husband, got pregnant by him, and now you're saying you don't want to make a big deal?" Rachel shrugged. "The world runs on reality, Charlotte, not emotions. Jonathan's gone. A handwritten will isn't valid. If I take this to court, the law will side with the child." "You're right," I said slowly. "The law might side with the child, but not with you." Rachel rose slowly and drifted toward the table, her gaze flicking over the stack of files. "So what did you find?" she asked, dropping the softness. "A hard drive? Photos? Some of Jonathan's little secrets he never told you?" "I found the truth." Rachel let out a short laugh. "Truth doesn't feed anyone, Charlotte, only money does." She turned toward the door, then paused and laid a hand over her belly. Believe it or not, this child is still family. One day they'll want to know why the adults were so cruel. I stared at her. You want to play that card, Rachel? We can take this all the way. She shrugged. Thing is, you're not the only one who knows how to go far. Jonathan taught me how to get what I want. She stepped out, heels tapping softly on the porch. But before she left, she turned back, eyes holding something strange. Not regret. I guess I wasn't the one he chose in the end, but I was the one he couldn't let go of. The door clicked shut and it felt like every ounce of air had vanished from the room. I sank into the chair, my stomach twisted. Not from jealousy. I genuinely believed Jonathan had known exactly what Rachel was capable of. And he let it happen anyway. I lowered my head, my hand resting on the sapphire necklace. It felt colder than ever. And now, I wasn't sure if it was a symbol of love, or the final key Jonathan had left behind to fix what he didn't have the courage to face while alive. I don't remember exactly what time I called Claire, only that my hand was shaking so badly it took 3 tries to dial the number correctly. I needed her. Not just for the hard drive, but because if I was going to unlock the truth, I didn't want to do it alone. Claire arrived in less than an hour, the same composed woman I'd always known, hair neatly tied back, her personal encrypted laptop in tow, and the seasoned eyes I once leaned on during other years of crisis. But nothing was like this time. Jackson was already waiting in the living room, documents from Jonathan's office neatly laid out on the table. The house was strangely still, like even it was holding its breath. I'm ready, I said, placing the hard drive on the table. Claire nodded. This one uses dual-layer AES encryption. But if what you said is true, that Jonathan worked in international investment funds, then I'm sure he left some kind of back door. Jackson looked at me. Could it be the necklace? I took off the sapphire necklace and opened the hidden compartment I had used earlier to unlock the safe. Inside was a tiny string of numbers and letters etched in laser-thin font. Mercy 747 VSCH. I read it aloud. Claire typed in the sequence. A soft ping sounded and the screen turned black, then displayed a single folder. Legacy. I glanced at Claire. She double-clicked it. Inside were 3 items. 1. Offshore accounts. 2. Contract. 3. Final message. Claire opened the first folder. The screen filled with PDFs. Long lists of bank accounts from Switzerland to the Cayman Islands, transfer funds, authorizations, quarterly reports. The numbers? I didn't dare read them aloud. Every line represented a part of a life I had never touched. A secret life, sophisticated, structured, and carefully concealed. All of these are under Redstone Equity, Claire said. But there's a new branch that split off last year. It's called Everwest Partners. Have you ever heard of it? I shook my head. No. Then he never intended for you to know, she said, her voice tinged with sadness. We moved to the contracts folder. Scans of asset transfer agreements. Some signed by names I'd never seen before, but others clearly bore the name Rachel Hayes. She signed contracts to receive assets from Redstone Equity? I asked, eyes narrowing. Claire pulled the file closer. No, these are temporary authorizations. Jonathan redirected profits from one project into her name to legitimize domestic investment, most likely to cover for withdrawals from another account. I exhaled sharply. She once said, Jonathan taught me how to get what I want. Looks like that wasn't an empty boast. Finally, I hovered the mouse over Final Message. A video icon appeared. I didn't click it right away. My heart skipped a beat. The screen faded in from black. The image was grainy at first, then sharpened. Jonathan. Faded shirt. Messy hair. His face looked hollow, exhausted. His hands were clenched together on the desk as if gathering every ounce of strength to say what he'd kept buried too long. Charlotte, he began, voice low and cracking at the edges. If you're watching this, it means I never got the chance to explain. He lowered his head. When he looked up again, his eyes weren't those of the man who used to bring me flowers every Sunday. They were the eyes of a man who knew he had broken something that couldn't be fixed. I couldn't protect Elise. I know you suspected something, and you were right. Rachel knew about Elise, knew about Jackson. But what I never said What I couldn't say is that I believe Rachel was behind the accident that took Elise's life. I held my breath. I don't have proof. But Elise told me she'd been threatened. Someone called her, said if she tried to leave the country with our son, an accident might happen. Elise didn't believe it. But the day she packed her suitcase, ready to go to the airport, the brakes failed. No one survived except Jackson. I turned to look at Jackson. He was staring at the screen, eyes unblinking. Jonathan continued. I lived as two men, Charlotte. One with you, peaceful, orderly, and one with Elise, reckless, free. I was selfish. I loved you both, but I didn't have the courage to choose. So I let everything slip through my hands. He bowed his head, silent for a moment. I left all the documents, everything Elise knew, everything she warned me about. If you found them, use them wisely. You're the only person I never wanted to hurt. And the last one I trust to make this right. Jonathan looked up, tears brimming in his eyes. The last time I saw him cry was when his mother passed. I'm sorry, Charlotte. For everything. The screen went black. No one spoke for a full minute. Claire gently rested her hand on mine. Jackson kept his eyes on the spot where his father's face had just been. I stepped outside, letting the silence follow me into the open air. The rain had just stopped. The ground was still wet, but the air was cool and crisp. I didn't know what I felt. Anger? Pity? Shame? No. It had all melted into something else entirely. Clarity. I knew now that I wasn't just a betrayed wife. I was a witness. The only living thread left between three people, Jonathan, Elise, and Rachel. And with that video, I now held the final confession and the beginning of a confrontation I could no longer avoid. I chose a small cafe in the old quarter, where sunlight filtered through vines on the patio and the smell of pastries mixed with fresh coffee. A place peaceful enough to hide the storm that was about to break. Rachel arrived on time. She wore a pale blue maternity dress, held a glass of orange juice, and smiled as if nothing could touch her. Brunch? You invited me? She asked, tilting her head. Color me surprised. I nodded, pulling out her chair. I thought we should talk, woman to woman. She laughed. As sisters, or as two women who loved the same man? We started with small talk. She asked if I planned to sell the house. I asked what name she had chosen for the baby. Neither of us mentioned Jonathan. Neither of us touched the waffles on the table. At last, I reached into my purse and placed a small plastic box on the table without a word. Rachel looked at it like it was a blade. What's this? Documents, I said. About Jonathan, Elise, Jackson, and the things you thought no one still had. She leaned forward, ready to grab it. I set my hand on top of the box, stopping her. She looked up. Her face had started to lose color. I'm not handing this to the police, I said. Not going to court, not calling the press. She narrowed her eyes. Then what do you want? I want you out of Jackson's life. I want your child to be born without shadows hanging over it. I want you to understand. I'm not here for revenge, but if you come near us again, I won't stay silent. Rachel scoffed, but I saw her fingers tremble. And what do you think you can do? I don't need to do anything, I just need to hit send on an email. She fell quiet, the smugness vanished from her face, her eyes now held something sharper. You think you're better, she said softly. You think forgiveness makes you noble? No. Forgiveness is something I'm still learning. But I choose to let go. Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to imprison myself in anger anymore. She pressed her lips together. And Jonathan, you think he chose you? No, I said. He didn't choose either of us. He chose cowardice. And in the end, we both lost. Rachel sat still for a moment, then whispered, You'll never understand what he saw in me. Maybe not, I said. But I do know this. If he were alive and saw you still threatening people with silence, he'd be more disgusted by that than by any mistake he ever made. I stood, picked up the box. I'm keeping the original. If you want a copy, I'll send a redacted version. But don't forget, I'm not someone you can manipulate anymore. I left the cafe first, without looking back. When I arrived home, my phone started buzzing in my bag, an unknown number. I nearly declined the call, but something made me pause. "This is Charlotte." There was silence on the other end, then a soft female voice, barely above a whisper. "Charlotte, it's me, Elise." I froze, my heart stopped. I grabbed the edge of the table, staring blankly into space. "Elise?" I repeated, unable to believe what I was hearing. "Don't hang up," she said. Her voice was faint but steady. "I know it's hard to believe, but I'm alive, and I need to see you. Not just because of Jackson, but because of the truth Jonathan never had the courage to tell." I drove to the place Elise had suggested the next morning. A small diner by the old ferry dock in Beaufort, South Carolina. The place was strangely quiet, as if time had forgotten it. The morning air by the sea was cool, the smell of salt mingling with toasted bread from the kitchen. Elise was sitting on the patio, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses. She looked slim, careful, like someone always ready to walk away if something felt wrong. I approached, my heart still pounding. She removed her sunglasses and I recognized those eyes instantly, the same ones I'd seen dozens of times in Jonathan's secret room, in the photos plastered across the wall. "You're Charlotte," Elise said first, her voice gentler than I'd expected. "And you're the woman I thought was no longer alive." We looked at each other for a long time, not like two women who loved the same man, but like two survivors of the same storm. "Where should I begin?" Elise asked, placing her hand over the untouched coffee cup. "Start with the day of the accident," I said, "and why you had to disappear." Elise nodded, gazing out at the sea. "That day, I was getting ready to take Jackson away. I'd bought plane tickets to Lisbon, booked a temporary hotel for us. Jonathan knew. He didn't stop me. He even gave me access to a separate account, just hadn't transferred the funds yet when everything happened." She paused and pulled a small USB drive from her purse. "The day before the crash, Rachel came to see me. She told me I should reconsider if I wanted to stay safe. I don't know how she found out my plan, but she made a clear threat. Luckily, I had been recording. I installed a tiny camera in the car after being followed previously. I took the USB with both hands, feeling like I was holding a piece of truth that had been distorted for years. Elise wasn't lying, I saw it in her eyes. There was no pleading, no manipulation, just the exhaustion of someone who'd lost everything and had to rebuild from ruins. "The crash happened the next morning," Elise continued. "I survived, but I was badly injured, 3 surgeries, temporary memory loss. By the time I woke up, Jonathan was gone. Rachel had vanished, and I understood. If I came back, I wouldn't just lose my son, I might lose my life." "You changed your name?" I asked. "Yes," Elise said with a faint smile, "and my entire life. I moved to Key West, worked at a small bookstore. Jackson knew I was alive, but I asked him to keep it secret. I was afraid that if Rachel found out, she might do something reckless." I nodded, a tightness forming in my chest. Not because I pitied Elise, but because I had once lived in peace, inside the illusion of a happy marriage, while others had to hide for their lives from the man I called my husband. "I don't blame you," I said slowly. "In fact, I think, if I were you, I might have done the same." Elise looked at me, her gaze softening. "And Rachel? How much does she know?" "I've confronted her," I said. "Put the evidence on the table. I didn't go public, but I made sure she understands. If she comes near any of us again, I won't stay silent." We sat in silence for a while. The sun rose higher. The sound of waves echoed in the distance. "What will you do next?" Elise asked. "I'm handing everything over to my attorney," I said, "to make sure you and Jackson are legally protected, to make sure no one, not even Rachel, can use the baby she's carrying as leverage ever again." Elise smiled gently. "Jackson loves you," she said. "He once told me, you're the only person who ever listened to him without asking for something in return." My eyes stung. "He's lost too much. I can't replace you, Elise. But if he wants to stay, I'll make sure he never feels alone again." We said goodbye with a brief hug. No grand speeches, no over-explanation. Just a quiet acknowledgement that although each of us carried different grief, we were stepping out of the same shadow. That afternoon, I brought the USB and all remaining documents to Marcus's law office. He said nothing as he watched the footage of Rachel threatening Elise. He didn't ask questions. He simply nodded, then called a colleague who specialized in civilian witness protection, beginning the process of legally securing Elise's new identity with full rights for Jackson. When I returned home, Jackson was sitting on the front steps, holding one of Jonathan's old books. He looked up when he saw me. I sat beside him. "I saw your mother. She's alive, and she loves you very much. I think I'll stay here for a while," he said. "Not because my mom doesn't need me, but because something about this place helps me breathe." I didn't say more. I simply placed my hand over his, giving a gentle squeeze. After all the loss, I knew one thing for certain. We weren't the ones left behind anymore. We were the ones choosing to move forward, together. The new kitchen was much smaller than the one in Charlotte, but I loved every inch of it. The lightly scratched oak countertop, the morning sunlight pouring through the spice shelf window, and my mother's old floral apron I always hung by the oven. That morning I was mixing waffle batter when I heard Elise laughing from the living room. Jackson must have told another story. Probably something from the philosophy book he was obsessing over. I couldn't make out the words, but that sound alone was enough to quiet something inside me, like a lake finally freed from the weight of a long-standing stone. "Charlotte," Elise called, poking her head into the kitchen. "Are the waffles ready? They smell so good I'm forgetting how to pace myself." I smiled. 10 more minutes, but if you pick some raspberries from the porch, I might shave it down to 8. Elise laughed, grabbed her shawl and stepped into the backyard. Jackson followed her, holding a wooden basket. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were mother and son. They were family. And me? I was no longer the woman standing outside a garage, trembling with a strange set of keys. I was the one who had seen everything and still stayed. It's been a year since everything collapsed. No lawsuits, no press. Rachel disappeared from the radar after the baby was born. She sent a handwritten letter, brief, unapologetic, simply saying she was leaving the state to start fresh where no one knew them. I left it unanswered. But I hid it, as a reminder of the woman I used to be and no longer was. The baby was born in the spring. A girl. Brown hair, eyes black as coal. Rachel named her Nora. I never held her. But I did visit the hospital once, quietly standing behind the nursery glass, watching the little one stir inside her blanket. Peaceful, unaware, breathing in a world not yet touched by truth. That night, I went straight to Marcus, my lawyer. "I want to set up a trust," I said. "The beneficiary's name is Nora Hayes. Activation age 21. No conditions." Marcus looked up from his folder. "You want to exclude the child's mother from any control?" "Absolutely," I replied. "And I'm not doing this for Rachel." He asked nothing more. I didn't need Rachel to know. I only needed Nora to grow up differently, not in darkness, not as a bargaining chip. She didn't choose where she was born, but I could help shape where she ended up. That evening, when I returned, I took the hard drive, the one that held everything, past recordings, videos, documents, into my new home office. A small space I made for myself with shelves of books, dried flowers, and a recessed wall safe. I placed the drive inside along with Jonathan's final letter I never burned. Then I added another USB, the footage of Rachel threatening Elise and the scanned original of Jonathan's handwritten will. I turned the combination, a quiet click, the steel door closed, clean and silent. Not every secret needs to be revealed. Some only need to be acknowledged. So no one remains bound by them again. I turned and stepped out of the room. Sunlight slanted across the kitchen window. Elise was washing her hands at the outdoor sink, hair tied up, cheeks pink from the breeze. Jackson stood beside her, holding a basket of ripe raspberries. I wiped my hands on my apron, turned on the oven, and slid the waffle pan onto the center rack. The smell of batter, butter, and cinnamon began filling the kitchen. This was no longer a house of secrets. It was a home of laughter, of memory, of trust. And most of all, it was mine. What would you do if one day you woke up and realized the person you loved for 15 years only ever showed you half of who they really were, the other half hidden behind encrypted hard drives, handwritten wills, and too-late confessions? I used to think forgiveness was weakness, but I've come to understand it's not acceptance. It's release, not to protect the one who hurt you, but to free yourself from what no longer deserves to be carried. And you? If you were in my place, knowing the truth, holding the proof, having the power to expose it all, what would you choose? To forgive, stay silent, or take it all the way? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I truly want to know what path you would take. And if stories of family, truth, and inner strength speak to you, follow the channel so you don't miss the next journeys to come. Because sometimes the quiet stories in kitchens, safes, or hearts are the ones that redefine everything.